So today we've started reading the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. I've been thinking, getting ready for this day, getting ready for this week. This is really my favorite book of the Torah. And I asked myself, really for the first time, why is this? Why is this my favorite book of the Torah? Is it just because we read it in the summertime and I like summer, there's no school, there's summer camp, there's my birthday, is it really all about the summer? And I'm sure those are contributing factors, but the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar, is really my favorite book of the Torah because it is so varied and so interesting. Also this week, in addition to starting the book of Bamidbar, we are holding with lots of love and support the Lambert family, which includes not just children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, but also a beautiful and big and extensive network of friends. We're remembering Bill Lambert with love, and if there's one thing I've learned about Bill during this week of Shiva, he was a person who inspired laughter. And so in his memory and honor, I'm bringing a lighthearted take on this week's parasha and on the book of Bamidbar, the top 10 highlights of the book of Numbers. So, note of clarification. This week's parsha is called Bamidbar. It's the first parsha in the book of Bamidbar, and these top 10 highlights are not only from this week's parsha, but the entire book. Now, there were a few other cool things that were great contenders for this list. There were some hard choices to narrow it down, but here we go. Okay. Number 10, Korach's rebellion. So Korach is this person who gets a couple of people to join him and goes to the leadership to advocate for change. Now, this, of course, is what Bill Lambert did. He went to Sacramento to advocate for positive change. He was very successful, but Korach and his people, not so much. So this is chapter 16, verse 28. You can follow along if you like on page 864. And Moses said, "By this you shall know that it was the Lord who sent me to do all these things, that they are not of my own devising. If these men, Korach's men, die as all men do, if their lot be the common fate of humankind, it was not the Lord who sent me. But if the Lord brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up alive with all that belongs to them, then you shall know that Korach and his men have spurned the Lord." Scarcely had Moses finished speaking all these words, when the ground under them burst asunder, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, all Korach's people and all their possessions. They went down alive with all that belonged to them. The earth closed over them, and they vanished from the midst of the congregation. All Israel around them fled at their shrieks, and they said, "The earth might swallow us." Terrifying. Okay, moving on to number 9. This is the story of Benot Tzlofchad, chapter 27, verses 1 through 7. You can follow along if you like, page 926. Notable, of course, because it's a group of women coming together to advocate for their empowerment and the empowerment of their family. So here's the situation. There's this man named Tzlofchad. At the time he died, he had 5 daughters and no sons. And so what the law of the land was at that time, there was no one to inherit what he had. There was no one to inherit his property and keep it within the family. So his 5 daughters got together, they united, and they approached the leadership again to ask if they could inherit the land and keep the family together. So Moses brought their question to God, and God said, yes, they could inherit. And so this is another story of advocating for positive change, but it was successful this time. Number 8, the boundaries of the promised land. I think this section is so cool. So chapter 34, verses 1 through 15. So the Torah says that we, the Jewish people, have land in Canaan, we call it Eretz Yisrael, that is our specific portion, and it defines the boundaries of this land. So don't necessarily translate exactly to our modern day geography, but so some of them do. So the southern boundary is from the tip of the Yam HaMelach, the Dead Sea, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, and there's a line that it describes in more detail in there. The western boundary, the Mediterranean Sea, the northern boundary, including the mountains of Lebanon and Sirion, and the eastern boundary along the Sea of Kinneret, the Jordan River, until the Dead Sea. Here in the book of Bamidbar, we show how the land of Israel, and we see how the land of Israel is the land of the Jewish people. Number 7. This is the Torah reading for Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov Maftir. This is like where all the Maftir readings for all the holidays come from. It's a long section, chapter 28, verse 1 to chapter 30, verse 1. And this section is called in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, the calendar of public sacrifices. So in other words, it's the instructions for what offerings we should bring in ancient Israel and ancient Jerusalem on weekdays and holidays. So we read from this selection. It's within Parashat Pinchas throughout the year, and one of our Sifrei Torah and our own Kodesh is practically permanently set to this section because we read from it so often. Number 6, reports of the land. Oh, interesting. Looks like my notes got a little bit messed up. So we can look here, page 843. So this is a moment of humor, which we love. Page 843, chapter 13, verse 25. I'll follow along. These moments that are unexpected bring so much humor. I love it. So page 843. What we see here, this is the episode of the scouts. And so we have 12 people, 12 men, one from each tribe, go to scout the land. They go and they see, this is a great land. There's a lot of wonderful produce, but there's only one problem. There are people living it, and those people are scary. And so we probably shouldn't go into the promised land because it's too scary. Now we have 10 people saying that, and we have 2 people, Caleb and Joshua, standing up being like, no, this is our land. We can overcome this people. We can make this our land. God says so, and we're going to make it happen. So thankfully, the reports of the 2 scouts, Caleb and Joshua, won out, and we did make our way there, but it was a little bit of a moment, and so that's reports of the land. Moving on to number 5, the red cow. So those of us who came to the weekly warm-up Torah study when we were reading Parshat Parah, we reviewed this, and there's 22 verses of instruction, starting with this idea of we got to find a red cow without blemish, which is almost impossible to find. And we've got to find this red cow without blemish so we can create the Mei Nidah, the water of purification. So we read these instructions every year on Shabbat Parah, in addition to when it comes up in the regularly scheduled Torah reading in the middle of the summer. And we read it leading up to Pesach, when we're starting to pay special attention to all the instructions that we follow only at one time of the year during Passover. So our below-the-line commentary, our Eitz Chaim Chumash, page 880, explains that this instruction about how to use the red cow to make this water of purification is the classical example of a law that defies rational explanation, and all the traditional commentaries seem to ask us to just accept the law without understanding it. We even have the Tosafot, commentators on the Talmud, describe this commandment, the Parah Adumah, and the making of the waters of purification. They describe it poetically and say, it's like a lover's kiss. We can't explain it, we can only experience it. Creative. So to me, this means that this instruction with the Parah Adumah, the red cow, it asks us for faith and for trust in what God is telling us to do, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it's not logical, which is pretty hard to do for at least me. I don't know about it's difficult. It's difficult to follow instructions that don't seem to make sense. All right, getting towards the end here. 4, Moses makes one mistake. Oh, this is so okay. Chapter 20, verse 7, page 884, if you're following along. God spoke to Moses, saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod, assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus says God, you shall produce water for them, for the community from the rock, and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts." Moses took the rod from before the Lord, as God had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them." Oh, so heartbreaking. In this puzzling incident, says our commentary below the line, page 884, this punishment seems grossly disproportionate to the offense. Why should Moses, who served God so loyally for so many years, be so harshly punished for this minor infraction? The classic commentators labor to find in the text some justification. One might conclude, our commentary wraps up and says, that God's decree of death in the wilderness was a recognition that the time of leadership for Moses and Aaron was over. They weren't sinners. They were the right leaders for the Exodus, for our becoming freed from slavery in Egypt, and for receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. They were the right leaders for that time, but at this time, they were not the right people to lead a younger generation into battle. So even our greatest leaders can't go on forever. That's why we need new generations, succession plans, leadership development, because our greatest leaders can't go on forever. All right, number 3, complaints about food. Complaints about food. This is so relatable, understandable, human, also kind of heartbreaking. Here's how it goes. Page 827, chapter 11, verse 4. It starts out, "The riffraff in their midst felt a gluttonous craving. The Israelites wept and said, 'If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. Then the Torah continues and explains, the manna is not all that bad. It says the manna was like coriander seed, and in color it was like bdellium, like a cream color. The people would gather it, grind it, boil it, and make it into cakes. It tasted like rich cream. And when the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall upon it. Very easy to access, always provided. So to me, this speaks to a deep spiritual idea. When we left Egypt, we left enslavement and we moved towards freedom. Now, why in the world would we want to go back to enslavement, to something that surely must be worse? Maybe it feels easier, more familiar, more comforting, but this is a real human tendency, and even perhaps an evolutionary strategy, to remember the past incorrectly. To remember incorrectly that things used to be good when in reality they weren't, especially when the present conditions are unfamiliar and scary. And what more human, what more relatable way to express this than, we don't like this new food. We prefer the old food and how delicious it was, how delicious it used to be. We forget it probably wasn't that delicious to be enslaved. We lie to ourselves and claim that there is nothing at all, when in fact, we're being given manna every day and its taste is rich. It's a spiritual imperative for us to let ourselves be freed from enslavement and embrace the challenges of freedom. And each of us must find what this means and how to do it in our own lives. Okay, number 2, we're getting more and more excited. This I call the upside down nuns. And I encourage everyone to actually open the book and follow along with your eyes for this one, because this is worth seeing. This is on page 826. And it's also got some of those crazy footnotes. So you can see it on the page, on page 826, kind of at the end of the page. And you can also see these upside down nuns in the Sefer Torah, in the Torah scroll, when we come to this parsha Beha'alotcha. And so if you look at the footnote, the very, very fine print kind of in the middle of the page, the notes on verse 35 and verse 36, this says, Simanit menuzeret, v'gam nikret nun hafucha, which translates roughly to a unique punctuation, also called the upside down nun. So we don't know exactly what these letters are doing, but what we do know is that this is the only time they appear in the Sefer Torah and the Torah scroll. Definitely serving a function of highlighting, of unique distinction. Their interpretations abound. If I was going to go into that, we'd be here for days and our bagels would get moldy, which we don't want. But this is the phrase, the upside down nuns frame the phrase that we say when we open up the ark at the beginning of the Torah service, which is very cool. Okay, so now, top highlight of the book of Bamidbar. Here we go. Can we guess it? It's in there. The talking donkey, the talking donkey. Okay, so the situation. The prophet Balaam is hired by the enemy king Balak to curse the Jewish people, and this story has a talking donkey. Page 894 below the line. The commentary reads, the story tells us how Balaam, reputedly the world's most powerful wizard, can't find his way out of his own neighborhood, and how his attempts to curse Israel are turned into blessings in his mouth. So the actual talking of the donkey goes like this. Okay, chapter 22, verse 28, page 897. The Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you, that you have beaten me these 3 times?" Balaam said back to the donkey, "You've made a mockery of me. If I had a sword with me, I'd kill you." The donkey said back to Balaam, "Look, I'm your donkey. We've been hanging out. You've been riding me for a while now. Have I ever done this to you before?" And Balaam answers, "No." So Balaam, the human, is kind of dumbfounded by the donkey at the end of this conversation. And so we have a couple of comments on page 897, verse 28 in our Eitz Chaim Chumash. God gave the donkey the power of speech. And then on the very next page, this sorcerer who is setting out to destroy an entire people with words, with his magical curses, which don't work even, apparently needs a sword to harm a donkey. And so page 894 below the line, introducing this section, our commentary says, this parsha contains what may be the only comic passage in the Torah. And I think it's such a fitting tribute to Bill Lambert to learn and reflect on and laugh along with this parsha today. So may the memory of Bill Lambert always be a blessing. May we learn from his life both the serious lesson of advocating for positive change and the lighthearted lesson of finding joy and laughter along the way. Shabbat Shalom.